All right, welcome everyone on behalf of the Plano Public Library. We are glad you are able to join us today for a primer on spring gardening. It is our pleasure to partner with the city's Sustainability and Environmental Education Division in providing this webinar, which will be led by educator Erin Hoffer, who has a wealth of information to share. When asked what she does for a living, Erin Hoffer quips that she gets paid to play in the dirt with worms and to encourage others to do the same as often as possible. She is delighted to combine her love of gardening and her love of education into a full-time vocation as an environmental educator and a part-time vocation as a master gardener and master composter volunteer. Thank you for joining us today, Erin.
Thank you. This is always my favorite time of year. I get to talk with people about what I love most, and that is gardening. So today what we're going to talk about is little gardens and big results. We always talk a lot, or we offer a lot of programs for folks that want to build like big beds and stuff, but we recognize that sometimes folks are in a situation where they have much smaller areas to garden in, or maybe they don't even have a plot, but they're willing to garden in containers. So we're going to talk a little bit about what can you plant and grow in very little space. Now, I love containers. I think containers are awesome because they're portable. That means you can move them if you need to for whatever reason. They are flexible. If you get the light wrong, if you have one pot that's blocking another pot, whatever, you can move them around. They allow you to be creative in small spaces, and they are a wonderful option for beginners to advanced gardeners. But I especially recommend container gardening for beginners because it's a very flexible and forgiving system. It's suitable for anything that you can grow. You can grow vegetables, herbs, flowers. Flowers are important because they attract those pollinators that are going to pollinate your crops. But there's so many different components to it. So let's talk about why not to select a container. There's a couple of downsides to it. One of the disadvantages is frequent watering. Now, I'm a military kid. I've lived a lot of places. And when I came to North Texas, I had to relearn gardening all over again because we have very challenging seasons. And adding to that is anything that's growing in a pot is going to require more water. And I decided when we moved into a house, I was going to do it in terracotta pots. That was not my smartest move because I watered them once in the morning and then I watered them again at night because the water was getting out so quickly. It was evaporating out of those terracotta pots. So one of the downsides is you are going to spend more time watering. The other piece, and most people don't think about it, and this applies to both your vegetables or anything at all that you grow in a container, is that you're going to need to fertilize. Um, that's because, unlike the plants that are in the ground, whose roots go into the soil and then they have an infinite resource for water and nutrients from the surrounding soil, the pots the plants that are living in pots have a limited amount of soil, and they have a hole in the bottom of their container. And that means that every time you water, all of those water soluble nutrients are leaching out or leaving the pot. And I think that a lot of people don't think about that. So that's why I mentioned it's not just for crops, it's for anything that lives in a pot. So you are going to need to feed whatever it is that you're growing. But today specifically, we're going to talk about fertilizing and supporting the crops that we're going to grow. Container selection is really important. And I know that a lot of times when we go into stores that have those beautiful containers, it's kind of overwhelming. It's like, oh, what do I pick? So I'm going to give you some tips on how to pick wisely. First and foremost, you have to think about what crop are you growing and how deep are the roots going to get? That's important because you want to make sure that you've got enough soil for all of those roots. The other piece is how big is that crop going to get? Because you want to make sure that it stays balanced in its container. Years ago, when we were first doing container planting with some of the youth in the community, we were using 5-gallon buckets. And for most of the crops that we had selected, that was perfect. Wasn't a lot of soil. They were flexible. They could move them around. I made one critical mistake though. When I bought the tomato plants, I forgot to make sure that I got the patio or dwarf tomatoes. And when I went back a couple of weeks later, as the containers were progressing, all of the tomato pots had fallen over on their side because they had already started to become top heavy, and we didn't even have any tomatoes developed yet. So mature size matters because you want to make sure that your planters stay upright. They're balanced. They're not top heavy. I also mentioned that because sometimes pots are designed so that the bottom of the pot is the same width as the top of the pot. That helps it to balance. But sometimes you'll get things that are like urns where the bottom is really narrow and the top is a whole lot wider. And those can be at risk of tipping over. So just keep that in mind as you are looking at the containers that appeal to you. You need to think about weight. How heavy is it? If you have to move that container, how easy is that going to be? And there are certain materials that are easier to do that with, and others that kind of once it's in place, you're pretty much stuck. And then always price. Now, the screen is showing one of my favorite containers. This is at the a reusable shopping bag. And as long as it's got holes in it, it's going to drain. It doesn't have to be very lightweight. This was an old one. It was a great way to repurpose it. Lettuce doesn't have, and greens as a general rule, don't require very deep roots. And look how cute it is, and think how cute it would be sitting on a picnic table at a party. So uh, keep in mind that there's probably things around the house that are for free and you can reuse them. Terracotta is great. It's definitely long lasting. It can be very informal, kind of like this one, sort of utilitarian in what it looks like. But a lot of them grouped together can be a very attractive presentation. But they also have very fancy ones that are considerably more expensive. The downside with the terracotta is the cold. When you have terracotta out, it's great at absorbing and releasing water through its sides so that you don't overwater, but it's also affected by temperature. And we get really hot summers. And the bigger problem is when we get really, really cold winters. And I have had small pots crack on me. The bigger the pot, the less likely it is. But that is something to take into consideration. They do last for a really, really long time. Also, they are breakable. You can kick them over, and they will crack. Ceramic is a little more expensive, or if you get a really big one, it's a lot more expensive. It has the same sort of properties as terracotta. The difference is because it's glazed, then on the outside and sometimes on the inside, that wicking action that terracotta has to adjust the water doesn't occur. Now, if you are overwatering, that might be a problem, but if you are underwatering, less of a problem. The positive side is, at least with ceramics, you're not likely to have your plants dry out. And when I had the terracotta pots, yeah, I would come home, and between the heat of the summer and the wind blowing across it, sometimes my plants were bone dry. And I really struggled with the terracotta. Ceramic, less so. Of course, there's always wood. Wood is attractive. A lot of people like it because it's natural. You can use old pallets and repurpose them into containers. The downside to wooden containers is the lifespan, depending on the wood. It can be as short as 3 years. It can be as many as 10 or 15 years, depending on how you take care of the wood. Wood also tends to be a little bit heavier, which means that it's going to be a little more challenging if you have to move it around for some reason or reposition it. Some of my favorite ones, I have to admit, are plastic. They come in lots of colors. That's a way for you to put a pop of color out there on your patio or in your yard. They are relatively long lasting, although I will say that plastic does photodegrade. So after it's been outside year round for about 3 years or so, it does have a tendency to get brittle and chip on the edges. So they don't last forever in that sense, but they do last for a really, really long time. They come in lots of different sizes. One of the key features is that they are lightweight. So if you have to move a pot, then really the primary weight is going to come from the soil or soilless mix that's in there, and then whatever plant you have in there. Also, they are really easy to scrub and clean and sanitize when you change at the end of the season when you change out the soil. Metal is great. I love metal buckets. Anything that's made out of metal will last a little bit longer. Some of the 6-gallon galvanized steel buckets that we have used in the community garden lasted probably about 6 or 7 years before the bottoms started to rot out. That was because they were down in the ground. They were partially sunken into the ground so that we could encourage worms to come up into the pots. But if it's just a regular pot, I think you can definitely count on a good 5-year run or more. And even if they start rusting at the bottom, that's fine. It just increases the ability of the water to flow outside. Concrete is really, really heavy, but the upside to concrete is that it's long lasting. You can paint and decorate it on the outside. You can even make your own concrete containers. You can get really creative about the shapes if you're making it for yourself. You can use concrete blocks. You don't even have to put a bottom in the concrete block. Just as long as you've got soil in the square, that's a great little container for growing vegetables and flowers and herbs in. Downside is that they're really heavy. If you have to move them around, it can be a problem. So let's talk a little bit about types of planters. Boxes are the most common one other than like a round barrel shape. This is a box. It's a box that was made with scrap wood, and you can see that it's just screwed together at the corners with galvanized steel screws. This will last for quite a while. Again, it depends on what type of wood you have. A basic box, this one is about 6 inches deep, and that's a pretty good depth for most planters. Troughs are another great way to do it. You can get a big trough. In this case, these are containers that hook together, but you can also get really small ones. Think windowsill planters. Those work great as long as the roots of the plant will have plenty of room to grow and they will fit, and as long as it's not going to tip over. Barrels. I love barrels. We use barrels and half-size barrels that are in the community garden. They are a really wonderful way to take up space, but not too much space, and still be able to have more than one crop in a container. I think one of the best reuses that we ever did was we had received a gift of trees, and the trees came in containers that were plastic that were essentially barrel size. So once we had taken the trees out, they had been planted in the community garden, then we repurposed those barrel-shaped containers into crop gardens. Some of them were mixed crops. We had a couple that were dedicated strictly to onions, garlics, and leeks, but they worked out great, and they looked really pretty, and they were super easy to take care of. Now, I know you have got some old baskets laying around. At least in my house, there's always some kind of basket. And baskets are great. They're lightweight. You can move them if you need to, especially if they need to be moved to a light. You can move them so that you can harvest them. They're usually made out of some kind of a natural material. Will it break down? Yeah, eventually it will decompose parts of it. But if you've got a basket and it's like it's been used and it's no longer good enough for another purpose, think about using that basket as a miniature container. And then, of course, there's buckets, plastic buckets. This is actually a representation from Kentucky. They had a project called Bucket Brigade. And what they did was fill this with planting mix, and then they put easy to grow crops in it. And they sold them for a couple of dollars to the public, but they also gave away hundreds of them to folks that were coming to the food pantry, and they taught them to grow some of their own food. So it's really, really easy. Buckets like these you can sometimes get for a couple of dollars at a DIY store, but you can also knock on the doors of places like any place that has pickles, because and it used to be that they would throw those buckets out. Not so sure anymore, but as long as food was contained in it and it's plastic, it is still safe. And for some restaurants, it's just something they have to get rid of. For other restaurants, it's like, no, we got to trade these in. But it's always worth a knock on the door to ask, hey, have you got any leftover pickle buckets? And all you got to do is drill some holes in the bottom. And the very most low-tech, simple, and easy bucket or container that you can possibly grow in is a bag of soil. Literally, the bag of soil, just cut the top off of it, and you should have enough there for the crops, because the bags of soil are going to be at least 12 inches or taller. And I actually have a really good example of how to grow tomatoes in a bag of soil. I mentioned planter depth, and so it is going to dictate which crops are going to grow. This is lettuce. It only requires 4 or 5 inches, but as you can see, these are basically growing in tubes. And if they can grow these in a tube, then you can grow them in a rain gutter. These are hydroponic, but the principle is the same. It just has to have a couple of inches. Also, lettuce and salad greens tend to have a fairly short plant to harvest time span. So it's really easy to plant them, harvest them, and plant another crop. Radishes are not very deep, and they even have miniature versions of radishes. Basil, I say 4 to 5 inches. Honestly, if you want a lot of basil, get a bigger container. I made the mistake of putting the basil the first year I was here in North Central Texas in a relatively shallow container. I think it was about 8 inches deep. And it was also a very small container. Yeah, I got basil, but not enough to make pesto, which I wanted. I found out later it was so much better to put it in a really, really big container, or eventually to just put it straight into the ground. Chives, coriander also have really shallow roots. So all of those are, if you've just got some really shallow baskets or containers, these will work for you. If you can get some containers that are a little deeper, then your choices of crops expands. Now, remember, these are a minimum depth. So all of the things that we're talking about right now, if you purchase, let's say, a barrel, and the barrel is a good 18 inches deep, everything that I'm talking about today can grow in that barrel. But if you're kind of scrounging around, trying to get creative, looking for containers that might serve as a growing place, then this is the absolute minimum to grow these crops. Peas, bush beans, even kohlrabi. Kohlrabi and onions and garlic all grow underground, so they do need a little bit more depth. And mint. I want to say something about mint. The only place that you should be growing mint is in a container. Otherwise, you're going to become a lifelong mint farmer. Mint gets away very easily into the soil and can take over. But I love this nice little shallow wooden container, super great way. And there's all kinds of varieties of mint, and boy, does it smell good. But in our community garden and at home, always growing mint in a container. So Once we start getting a little bit deeper, we can have things like cucumbers and pole beans. Both of those need support. So not only do you need a planter depth of at least 8 or 9 inches, but you're going to have a support. So here you see some pole beans. Definitely this container is a little bit deeper than 8 inches, and it's fairly heavy, and it's got a support in it. So always make sure that you allow for that additional weight, both the weight of the support and the weight of the crops, because remember that the cucumbers are going to weigh something. Pole beans, not so much. The pole will, but the beans themselves are not going to. Chard is pretty easy. It stands up on its own. Carrots go down into the ground. Honestly, carrots all really would do better if you were closer to 12 inches, but there are miniature varieties or dwarfed varieties of carrots. There's lots of different colors of carrots. And even though the seed packet says spring, I will tell you they actually do better as a fall crop here. We plant them usually in the fall and we let them go all the way into a killing frost period. This year, they have gone for quite a while. Uh, Eggplant, fennel, leeks. Fennel and leeks are underground, and I will say that fennel can get really, really tall. We used to have one in our community garden, and it got to be about 5 foot tall. Now, ours happened to be growing in a raised bed, but you can grow it in a pot. Just make sure that that pot is good, sturdy, and has a heavy bottom so that it does not fall over. And then I love this one. If you want to grow potatoes, potatoes need to be done in a container. If you have ever grown potatoes in the ground, it is such a chore to harvest those potatoes. You have to get out your hand claw or hand trowel. You have to get out a shovel. You get to get on your knees. You have to crawl around. You got to dig in the soil and try to find those potatoes. But if you grow them in a bag, and you start them kind of towards the bottom with some soil, and then you let their leaves grow up to at least 6 to 8 inches tall, and then you bury the plants to their neck, and you continue that until the leaves are cascading out the top, and then you wait. Harvest is all you got to do as soon as those potato leaves start to turn brown, it's telling you that the potatoes are done. You just get a tarp and dump all the potatoes out. Super easy to get your crop. Number one recommendation, don't bother growing the potatoes in the ground. Grow them in a bucket, grow them in a sack. They're so much easier. Beets, summer squash, dill, lemongrass tend to have a little bit deeper roots. So lots of choices here, and I hope I'm hitting your favorites. Don't overlook hanging baskets. Vertical space is definitely a viable space. I think sometimes we get caught up with everything has to be on the ground, but if you've got good sun and you have a place for them to hang, do it. What I love about this picture is the one that is on the right-hand side is actually cherry tomatoes planted upside down. They're just out of the frame is a 5-gallon bucket. So imagine the 5-gallon bucket. It's got its little handle. The handle is what you hang it on. They stuck a big hole in the bottom, put their soil in, and then they stuffed the tomato up inside of it. They water from the top of the bucket. It all dribbles down. And yeah, this is a great technique. If you don't have a lot of room, go vertical and use some of that space. Now, I just want to give you a few more ideas of veggie containers. Yes, you can actually grow in a Capri Sun container as long as there is a hole. That's really the main part. Does it have drainage? Want to know what to do with that old lunchbox? Yeah, some of us are old enough to remember metal lunch boxes. You can definitely put flowers and herbs in them. I love this picture. Old Raggeds. We used to have one of those radio flyers when I was a kid. My mother actually used to put pots in it when we grew up, and we were too old for doing it. She would just put her pots inside of it, and it made it a really easy way to drag it around in the patio. If you happen to inherit Aunt Myrtle's old suitcases, here's what you can do with them if they don't meet specification for flying on the airplane these days. Basically, if it can hold soil and it has drainage, it is definitely a candidate for being a container. And this is the photo I mentioned earlier. If you are ready to grow tomatoes and you want the least amount of fuss possible, get yourself a bag of garden soil, plant your tomatoes deep, and let them grow. At the end of their growing season, just pull them out and you can plant something else in them. At the very end of the season, at the very end, like when we get to the winter time, at that point, the soil may be depleted. You can still mix compost back in it. You can put that soil out in your yard. You can put it into a different container. But this is the quick and easy way to garden with tomatoes. So let me do a quick check here, Meredith and Eric, and see if anybody's got any questions that have popped into the chat box. Okay, I am not seeing any, unless I missed something.
Nope, no questions so far.
All right, sweet. So let's talk about, we've talked about containers. Let's talk about selecting a site. First of all, minimum 8 hours of direct sunlight on the plant. Now, people always say, well, what if I don't have 8 hours? Are there plants that will grow? Yes, there absolutely are. Think in terms of things like lettuces, root vegetables, that most of the plants underground, things like carrots and parsnips, radishes, definitely. So you can get away with some of those. And then pole beans. Bush beans need direct sunlight and lots of it. Pole beans can tolerate. So if you've got a good 4 to 5, maybe 6 hours, yes, you can. But if you really want it, your favorites, our summertime favorites that are tomatoes and eggplants and peppers and all of those things that we melons, they have to have the 8 hours of sunlight. You need to make sure that you're close to a water source because you're going to have to either drag your hose over to where your containers are, or you're going to have to carry a container with water. Keep in mind that a 1 gallon of water weighs 8 pounds. So if you've got like a 5-gallon container and you've got 2 or 3 gallons of water, that starts to get, that can be like 25 pounds of water to water your containers. So make sure that you are close to a water source. Check for drainage, especially if you are draining if you have your pots and they are made out of things that are like I mentioned the bags, make sure they've got good drainage. This is a photograph of strawberries. If this had been immediately after a rain, I would have gone, okay, fine, not a problem. But if I had come back after 2 or 3 hours and this much water was sitting in my container, I would be concerned. Plants need water. They take it up through their roots, but they also need oxygen. And if we have too much water and we've got some sort of a blockage at the bottom of the container and it's not draining properly, then you are at risk of waterlogging those roots. So just check your drainage. One of the tips I have is when I buy a new container, before I put anything at all in it, I will take it out in the yard, particularly like in an area that like around a tree. Why? Because I never waste water. And I will attempt to fill the container with water. I want to make sure that as soon as I put water in there, it's draining out the container. And if I've got it underneath a tree, any water that I am using for my testing of the container drainage doesn't get wasted. It goes straight into whatever plant is nearby. The reason I started doing this is because one year I really didn't check the pot very carefully that I had purchased. And after I had filled it with soil and I had put plants in it, I noticed there was a problem. Well, at the end of the season, because it was always wet, at the end of the season, when I was pouring out the soil and I was mixing in more compost, I noticed that where the drainage holes were, one of the drainage holes, the plastic had not been completely knocked out in the manufacturing process, and it was what was clogging it. So that's what made me adopt the practice of running the water through the containers to make sure that there was good drainage. Then, after I had put in my soilless mix or growing medium or soil, then I also ran water through it to make sure before I ever put a plant in, make sure that that drainage is still going and it's a good timing of drainage. The rule of thumb is that for every inch of water in the container, you should at least have it draining 1 to 2 inches per hour. If it's not draining at least an inch per hour, then you've got poor drainage. But since these are pots and you are either purchasing or making up your own soil, you're less likely to have a problem with it. But I always say check it just in case, because the water and the oxygen are really critical to the plant growth. And a unique thing that you need to check for with pots or container plants is watching for the wind. Sometimes or often when we are working with container plants, they are most often like in patios or areas that are closer to the house. Remember that the wind goes around the house, and as it does, it has the risk of possibly tipping over containers, particularly containers like this one that are taller. The more leaves there are, the more of it becomes a sail. When the plants were really, really tiny and the frame was just there, not much chance of it tipping over. Once the plants start getting taller, even though this actually has a pretty good amount of soil in the bottom of it, which makes it bottom heavy instead of top heavy, I would still be checking for wind. The other danger with wind is if you have it positioned in the wind, essentially the wind tunnel as the wind's moving around your home, that wind batters the leaves and it's a challenge. It begins to accelerate the evaporation of the water from the leaves and also from the soil around it. So just keep an eye on wherever you place them, is the wind having an effect? If it is, try to ooch it away from the wind, move it a little bit, or give it some kind of protection, something that is going to keep the wind from beating on your plants. And as you're putting in the plants, you need to think about how tall is this plant going to get? How wide is this plant going to get? Because you always, in putting your plants in and grouping them, if you've got a bunch of them in a single container, your tallest ones are going to either be in the middle with the short ones around, or they're going to be at the back with the short ones in the front. You're always looking for the direction of the sun to make sure the short ones in the front don't get shortchanged on the sunshine. So let's see. Any other questions that popped in there? Oh, I saw something that said, what speed of drainage is considered good? At least 1 to 2 inches per hour. All right, so let's talk. Yeah, go right ahead.
Sorry, Eric. We did have a question about, are there any plants that can be grown in cinder blocks?
I will tell you, that is a great question. Pretty much everything. We have used cinder blocks as the edging for a number of our beds at the community garden, and I consider them bonus mini gardens because they edge the bed, but then we can grow all kinds of smaller plants. The only limitation is that those blocks are not very deep. They're somewhere, it seems like they're, if I recall correctly, they're about 6 inches deep. We have grown garlic, bunching onions, strawberries, flowers, quite a number of the herbs, basil not so much, more like things that are trailing. Thyme worked really well for us. I'm trying to think what other things. But yeah, absolutely, things that are um, short rooted, I guess. Shallow rooted is the correct term. Those definitely should work.
Thank you.
And okay, great. I also see something that says my patio is west facing. What can survive the heat? I have a condo. That is an excellent question. What you're going to look for are probably going to be your summer plants, things that are tropical, things that come from Africa, Central America originally. Those are going to be anything or most anything in the Solanaceae family. Those are everything that you want to put into your ratatouille, if you will. That's going to be tomatoes, definitely green peppers, eggplant, okra. Give me a second here. Oh, definitely onions and garlic. They can stand it. Just be mindful that you may be having reflected heat for the most part. The nice thing about it is that with those container plants, if where it's sitting is getting too much, you can always move it. That's the whole advantage of the container. If you want some more coaching on it, my contact information is at the end of the presentation. Take note of it, and I am happy to chat with you by phone or online. And let's talk about what do you want to grow, and like which things are likely to do well, and which things might struggle a little bit with the heat. All right, so let's talk about the pot. Now, I already mentioned checking the drainage. One thing that a lot of people think is, oh, I'm going to put gravel in. First of all, science says you don't have to put gravel in at the bottom of pots anymore, regardless of the size of the pot. I say skip the gravel, especially if it's a big container, because the gravel is going to be heavy. And if the pot is this big and you only need this much for your roots, then all of that is extra weight that you may not need. What are your alternatives? Well, most of us have plastic liter bottles, maybe from soda pop. We have plastic jugs, maybe from juice and milk. Those all can be piled into the bottom of a bigger container. They don't even have to be full. In fact, I wouldn't recommend that they're full unless you need some ballast to keep your pot upright. Plastic bags. I have used plastic bags before. When I saw this tip, I would thought, oh, how did I not think of this? That was a brilliant suggestion. You know how we're always gathering up our plastic bags and we're stuffing them into one bag so that we can make a big ball that we can drop off at the grocery store for recycling? Save a couple of those balls of bags and use those in there. Soil's not going to hurt it. Water, well, they're waterproof, so the water's not going to hurt it. They're lightweight, and they're not going to hurt the soil. So it's a really good solution. Also, if you have unused plastic pots, take those plastic pots, flip them upside down, and then put your soil in around it. Last resort, cheap, easy, and available to most of us, cardboard. Take your cardboard and fold it. Put it in the bottom. Now, the first things I mentioned that are made out of plastic, they're going to last for quite a while. They're going to last basically forever. But the used cardboard is going to break down, and it probably will last you for the year. But a great, cheap, easy way to partially fill up a pot that's really big and still be able to plant in it. Now, you want to select a good growing medium. A lot of times you'll hear potting soil. It makes me laugh because there's no soil in potting soil. Now, a lot of times you'll see it says soilless mix or soilless potting mix, which I think is a much better word for it. when you are selecting it, try to get the ones that are formulated for vegetables, because they've got additional fertilizers that have already been added to the mix, and it is specifically formulated for vegetables. There are vegetables that are light feeders, or they don't take up as much nutrient, but there are a lot of them, and they tend to be the ones that we love the most in the summertime, like melons and tomatoes. Those are heavy feeders. So you're going to want that the soil that they're starting out in to already have some nutrition in it. Now, you can make your own soil from equal parts of peat moss or coir. Peat moss is not quite so sustainable, so we definitely recommend pick the coir. Coir is the outer husk of the coconut, and that's very renewable, very sustainable, and it is affordable. And perlite and vermiculite, you can buy them by the bag. And then compost, we always recommend compost. Even if you're not making your own soil, you're buying the soilless mix, we always recommend putting some compost on the top, so that you're creating compost tea every time you water. So the equal parts, I recommend taking and putting it all out on a tarp. Why a tarp? Because you can take a tarp and pull it from both sides. You can get the neighborhood kids to do it for you. And the mixing is pretty quick and easy. It's so much easier than trying to mix it in a container. Although I will say you can do it in a wheelbarrow if you happen to have one. But a tarp is awesome, convenient, and when you're all done, you just fold it up and put it away. So I'm all about what is easy. If you choose to use soil, which is definitely going to be heavier, then pick good quality soil. And if you live in Fresco, Richardson, Allen, McKinney, or Plano, thank you for helping us to make good quality soil products. Through the regional composting facility. The brand or the product line is called Texas Pure. And here you are seeing compost on the right, top dressing, which is a finer mix of compost in the middle. The little tiny bag is Powerful Potting Mix. And it actually, I like it for smaller containers, but it's a little, if you're trying to fill a really big container, not your most budget friendly option. But Pro Bidding Mix is, and that is the one that is on the far left-hand side. It's about 50% soil, 50% compost. Works great. We use it in all of our containers at the community garden. But you always have the option, again, of putting it out on a tarp and mixing it yourself. Half native soil, half compost. Just mix it up and use it. Definitely, though, put the compost in. Don't skip that, because that is where a lot of your nutrients are going to come from. You will need to feed. Remember I said that those plants are sitting in a container and there's a hole at the bottom and the water is going through, and the water soluble nutrients are flowing out the bottom. They're getting leached out of that soil. Things that we put in: granulated molasses, that helps to encourage bacterial growth. It also comes in a liquid form. It's called horticultural molasses. If you attempt to use molasses from your cupboard, just make sure it says unsulfured. That's because sulfur will kill off the microbes, and you want those microbes to be introduced. So horticultural molasses is unsulfured, dried molasses is unsulfured. Increase the bacterial activity in your soil. Composted manure, that is a complete fertilizer, a complete soil amendment, and it really doesn't have much of a smell to it. From the commercial products, when you open them up, a little goes a long way. Follow the instructions on the package. Seed meals tend to be a little more on the expensive side. Alfalfa, soy, cotton seed meal, cotton burr, those are all nitrogen fixers. And so when the plant has been harvested, its body still has the nitrogen, and nitrogen is what the heavy feeders want. So those are great to mix into the soil. However, they are really, really pricey. Our way around it is that Wells Brothers Farm Store on Avenue K in Plano has a proprietary blend called Dirt Doctor, and that has compost, molasses, some of the seed meals, and one other item that escapes me right now. I'll have to go look it up for you all. And it's in a pellet form. So it makes it really easy to just sprinkle it out on your crops or into your containers. The key to success is feed every 2 to 3 weeks throughout the growing season. That way, even though the nutrients may be leaching out the bottom and they may be taken up in the plant, you are continuing to add food back in at the point in which the plants need it. So real quick, let's talk about what can you grow starting this season. First, November, December, January, those are the good times to prepare your soil, get it all mixed up, get it ready to put in your pots, get your pots all nice and clean, especially if they had grown from last year, unless you're growing winter crops. Lots of folks shut down their container plants once we hit our November killing frost season. So that's the winter time is the time to make sure that your pots are really, really clean and that you are mixing up and preparing that soil so that when we get to the season, you are ready to go. We always plant by soil temperature, and it's going to depend on the crop, the soil temperature. One of the handouts that I provided to you is the Capel Vegetable Gardening guide, and in it tells you when you can plant things. So it's sort of like, when can I plant artichokes, as opposed to what can I plant in January. One of those columns will tell you for seeds and for transplants, actually it's 2 columns, the appropriate temperature for that particular crop. A soil temperature gauge is about $10. Go get one. If you're serious about growing stuff, go get one so that you know when the soil in your container has heated up enough that it's the right temperature. Or if it's too hot and you're like, oh, why are the peas doing badly? Because it got too hot. And so now it's time to pull the peas out. Be sure that you plant after the last average frost date, unless you're growing winter crops. That is March 15th. So you need to mark that on your calendar. It's coming up. I also provided to you the Collin County Master Gardener Vegetable Garden Planting Guide. I really, really like this because visually it's so easy to figure out when you are supposed to plant things. It doesn't cover every single crop. That's why I also supplement it with the Capel Vegetable Garden guide as well, because it covers more crops. So between the 2 of those, pretty much you can figure out what goes into your pots and when. We are still in the spring and you need to have some frost protection ready. So far, we haven't had anything cold enough that we needed to have serious wrapping. But if you have crops and they're already starting to come up, or you've planted seeds, you need to at least be able to put something over them to keep the frost off of it if we get a frost warning at night. I always say have it ready. You may not need it, but you are going to be really sorry if the plants are partway through their growing season and all of a sudden, boom, we get a killing frost. We've had years even in April, like middle of April, we've had a hailstorm and it just totally took out the crops that were in the community garden. So have them ready and at hand just in case. A common question that I get from people is, do I plant seeds or do I plant transplants? Seeds are less expensive and you have a greater variety of or a greater number of choices in the varieties that are available. But keep in mind, it's going to take longer until they are ready to harvest because they're just starting. They're babies. They're just starting at the beginning. Transplants, however, are more expensive and you have limited choices because the grower will check the records, like what sold well last year. Okay, we're going to plant just those and maybe a couple of new varieties we think people are going to get excited about. They're investing time, energy, labor, money, water, space in the greenhouse. All of those come at a cost. That's why transplants are more expensive, but they are farther into the growing cycle, which means you're going to reach harvest a whole lot sooner. So they have their ups and their downs. I recommend trying a little bit of both. When you pick your transplants, make sure that they are healthy specimens. You're looking for clean white roots. And you, if at all possible, I take the time to dig through and see if there are multiple plants in a pot. Best day ever in a nursery was I went to go buy basil plants and there were 3 little babies in one pot. So for my $3.98, I didn't get one. I got three, got them home, divided them up. That was an awesome basil year. The flip side is when you're looking at them, make sure that they are not root bound, kind of like this fella here in the middle. Make sure that there's no swampy or ammonia-like or sour smell. That's an indicator that the roots have gone or the ambient, the soil around the roots has gone anaerobic. And that is not the healthiest situation. The other thing is make sure that there are no creepy crawlies, no pests, because, well, do you really want to bring those home to your yard? So what are we going to plant? Well, if we are planting in February, that is this month, potatoes, onions, leeks, peas. I call that combination the lucky leprechaun soup. So if you love your leprechaun, but in February all the way up until March, plant these so that you can serve leprechaun soup to your favorite leprechaun. Later into February, beginning into March, we got beets, mustard greens, lettuce, peas. All of those are super delicious. Every single one of them is container friendly. April, now we are getting ready to do our some of our hot weather crops. Beans, squash, and cucumbers do the seeds. Eggplant, pepper, tomatoes, and melons, then go ahead and get your transplants out because they have a really, really long growing season and you want to get those going as best as possible. Tomatoes are super hard, especially for beginners, to grow from seed. So those last ones, go ahead and pay the money, get the transplants. And then in May, I always teach the children, if you love your mama, make sure that you plant her some sweet potatoes by Mother's Day. And the other thing is okra. Okra is a hot weather crop. Actually, both of them are hot weather crops. Okra comes from Africa. The potatoes or the sweet potatoes tend to come from Central and South America. It's a more tropical zone. They need warmer soil. That's why we wait until May, even in containers. And yes, you can plant your sweet potatoes in the bags, just like regular potatoes. Couple of tips for herbs for the spring and summer. All of these are great. Parsley I starred because that is really a cool weather crop, does great in the spring. And then it'll come roaring back in the fall. In the summertime, it won't look so good, but don't worry about it. It's if you've planted perennial parsley or biennial parsley, I should say, just accept that it's not going to look great in the summertime. Basil, you can plant it in the spring, but it's not going to take off until the summertime. It also is a hot weather crop. Last thing is maintenance. So efficient watering. You need to provide what the plant needs, not what you think the plant needs. That means that you need to use a moisture meter. Moisture meters, about $10, but if you show up to one of our in-person classes in the Sustainability and Environmental Education Division, we are happy to give you a moisture meter for free. It is our way of helping you to learn to be water conserving in your garden, whether it's in the ground or it's in the pots. Only put the water out that the plant actually needs. Most of our crops need to be in the moist zone, not the dry, not the wet, but the moist zone. A handful of crops need to dry out in between. You learn that by the crop. Yes, Miss Erin is not going to give you every single answer because there are so many crops. So it's like learning your children. They're children, but they have personalities and they each have different needs. So are the plants. Each of them has a little bit different need than its neighbor. So definitely get a moisture meter and be consistent with your watering. That was where I made my big mistake with tomatoes and melons was I figured, twice a week is good. No, it was really bad. Until I learned to water properly, I was not able to grow a good tomato. Also, make sure that you're watering early so that your leaves dry out before the evening. we generally have a fairly dry summertime, but if you water from overhead and you water later at night and the water sticks to the plant and you create a very moist situation, and there happens to be the possibility of a pathogen like mildew in the air, like powdery mildew is a good example, then you're creating a situation where it can develop. So just water early in the day so that the leaves have time to dry out, and the water's available for the plant all throughout the day, and everything is good to go by nightfall. When you get ready to harvest, the really important part is knowing which part of the plant to harvest, what you are going to eat. And that sounds like a really odd comment, but most of us know on a tomato plant, you just eat the fruit, and that's maybe 10 to 15% of the mass of the plant. That means the 85% that's left, all of those nutrients have come up into that plant, but you can't eat it. It has oxalic acid in it. So we would never think to eat a tomato stem or a tomato root or a tomato leaf. However, peas, did you know every part of the pea except for the root, and only because it's not very tasty, every part of a pea is really tasty, and you can eat it. You can eat the vine, you can eat the leaves, you can eat the flowers, although if you want pods, you got to leave some of the flowers on there. So know which part of the plant is the part that is appropriate to eat. Harvest promptly. That usually means pretty much daily. And remember to compost whatever's left. Remember, I said all of the nutrients have come up through the body of the plant. And it's not just in the edible part, but it's in all of it. And you want those nutrients to go back into the soil whenever possible. If you live in a situation where you can't compost, then at least put them in the nice brown bags that go to the curbside for the city to pick up and send out to the composting facility. And you know that no matter what you grow, there's always going to be extra. So share that bounty, share it with friends and families, and even the Plano food pantries. They would love to get your fresh, delicious produce. One more resource that I gave you was the vegetable gardening guide from Texas A&M. In addition to that, there are some awesome online resources from Aggie Horticulture, which is Texas A&M. And if you are wondering, like, what is going on with my vegetable? What's that weird bug? Why do I have these things happen into my leaves? Vegetable IPM is a wonderful place to go and look at the insects by name or by photo, or you're like, well, what could possibly get on my squash plant? Look it up by the crop. They will tell you and give you information on how to deal with it. There are excellent resources on vegetable gardening. I draw your attention to the bottom of the screen where it says commercial crop guides. Don't let that deter you from downloading. Just because it says eggplant and you think it's for commercial growers, there's still good tips on growing eggplant in those commercial crop guides. Also, if you are either growing squash or something in the squash family, we call it the cucurbit family. And those are things like loofahs, squash, cucumbers, melons, and pumpkins. I was trying to think what last one was. We have a cucurbit problem solver by the part of the plant or by the insect that you see, and they will tell you how to deal with it. And of course, America's favorite vegetable, the tomato. Everybody wants to grow a tomato, and tomatoes potentially have a lot of problems. So you can go to the tomato problem solver at Aggie Horticulture, and they will help you identify what the problem is. I have used it a lot trying to troubleshoot what has gone wrong with my tomatoes. The last resources I want to offer up to you before we go are Collin County Master Gardeners are always available to you. Just Google Collin County Master Gardener, and up will pop ccmgatx.org. There is a place on there that says contact us, and you can submit to the queue your questions. Pictures are always appreciated. Please remember it's staffed by volunteers like me, and so it may take us a little time. You can also call, and even if we're not there, just leave us a detailed message. We'll get back to you, talk to you about what's going on in your garden, and try to do our best to give you research-based choices so that you can make a choice that's appropriate for you and your situation. Don't forget the internet, reputable nurseries, classes, but my number one place, Plano Public Libraries. We have awesome libraries here in Plano. We should definitely use that resource. Speaking of resources, you can always use me as a resource. I am Erin Hoffer. I work for the SEED, Sustainability and Environmental Science or Environmental Education Division. You can call me. Quickest way to get hold of me is send an email to seed@plano.gov. Tell me what your question is. Tell me what you're struggling with or what you need some help on. And I am always happy to assist you. Are there any questions that are pending for us today, Meredith?
Yes, we do. So just to confirm, the plastic bags and other plastic things into the planters, was that to help fill up extra space?
Yes, that is to fill up extra space, because remember I said that you want it to be light as necessary, so that you're not trying to haul something really heavy. Like if you have to move it like 2 foot over for some reason, you want it to be more convenient. So yes, those are lightweight, inexpensive ways to fill up the space. If you've got something that's 12 inches deep, but you only need the crops in it are only 4 inches deep, then by all means, fill up those remaining 8 inches. And the other thing is that if you've purchased soil is expensive. And so you want to make sure that you're only putting out what you actually need. And that allows you to kind of keep your budget within reason.
Okay, and then we had a request to repeat the place to get the molasses compost blend that you mentioned off of Avenue K, I think it was.
Oh, Wells Brothers Farm Supply Store. They are just south of the intersection of Avenue K and Spring Creek. If you go to that intersection, you'll see that Sam's Club is there. They are just south of it, and they are on the west side of the street, just like Sam's Club is. So it's really, really easy to find.
Okay, and then we did have a question tying back to the filler. Can styrofoam bits be used as filler?
You totally can use styrofoam bits. I used to actually put that in there. I took it out when I was updating this the other day, simply because a lot of people take those styrofoam peanuts back to packing places and get them to be reused. However, yes, styrofoam peanuts. However, here's my tip. Don't just put the styrofoam peanuts in like I used to do. Put your styrofoam peanuts in a bag, tie it really good, and make bags of styrofoam peanuts. That way, when you decide, okay, I'm done with this, or I want to put this in a different container, you don't have to be picking out individual styrofoam peanuts like I have had to do out of your soil. It's so much easier to just reach in and grab that bag full of styrofoam peanuts. But yes, you absolutely can do that.
Okay, and then let's see. There was another one. Oh, there was a question about how to best protect plants, but I'm sure that's probably a whole class on its own.
Yeah, that's a send me an email at seed@plano.gov. Tell me what it is that you're trying to do, and I am happy to give you some choices based on your particular situation. But yeah, that is kind of an advanced class in itself sort of topic.
Okay. And then there was a question about greenhouses. So I assume that would be another.
That would be another offline discussion.
Okay. And then we've got one final one about the tags that come on transplants saying spacing and planting depth, and what does that specifically mean?
So when you have transplants, they have a root ball, and the root ball's got to go down into the ground. And what I am saying does not apply to tomatoes, because with tomatoes, we plant them deep. But if they tell you, usually planting depth when it refers to transplants, most of the time you want to make sure that the root ball is below the soil line. With spacing, there's something that's called on center. So if, let's say I had a big long trough and I wanted to put lettuce and it said that you needed to plant them, or you needed to space them 6 to 8 inches apart, then 6 inches on center or 8 inches on center means from the middle of one plant to the middle of the other plant is 6 or 8 inches. And the reason for that is, remember the plant is going to mature. You're buying a baby or kind of a mid-sized one. It's going to get big. It needs enough space to be able to mature to the size that it was intended to be. It also helps to kind of reduce some of the competition for water, sunlight, and nutrients. So I'm hoping that helps. If you need more information, again, seed@plano.gov, send me a note, and I will be happy to give you more details.
All right, I think that covers all the questions that we had.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for inviting me. I love collaborating with my colleagues in the library. It is so much fun to chat with folks, and I'm going to hand it off to you, Meredith.
All right, well, thank you for joining us. We will be sending out a follow-up email with a recording as well as links to the handouts that were provided in the chat, just in case you missed those. And we will be having more programming coming up, so check out our website, planolibrary.org, for future programming. You can also check out our YouTube channel for past programming if you want to catch up on things that you missed that we covered earlier. Thank you again for joining us, and do fill out the survey that pops up at the end after we've closed out. We'd love to get feedback about what we can do to improve our programming, and if you'd like to see additional information, this is a great way to let us know so we can work on making those programs happen for you. Thank you, everyone.